Welcome back. We're talking about tensions over the planned deployment of the United States THAAD missile system in the Republic of Korea. Let's get back to our panel. And Jenny, I have a question on whether these developments in South Korea could lead to a new arms race in the region. But first, I'd like to get your reaction to the concerns expressed by our Chinese.
I would say, especially in response to the Russian, I feel like on some level we talk very big power politics. It's U.S., China, U.S., Russia, China, Russia, and they forget about Korea and Japan. And the statement that North Korea hasn't attacked anyone since 1953 is simply wrong. In 2010, there was the sinking of the Cheonan. There was also the shelling of Yeonpyeong Island. And this is something that had started to trigger already calls in South Korea for more bolstered defenses and even starting to bring up the issue of whether or not South Korea should have its own nuclear weapons. And while that was sort of a fringe movement back then and kind of fringe voices, it is something that's more actively debated in mainstream in the mainstream public today. And so, it's not necessarily that THAAD is going to trigger an arms race. It's that North Korea has already triggered an arms race. And because it hasn't been dealt with, because we haven't been able to deal with this issue, and the strategies towards this have not been effective in recent years, the arms race is already happening. And so the question is again, we can bolster defenses because North Korea is becoming more aggressive and because it is threatening our strategic interests, both the U.S. and especially South Korea, that does feel that this is a core security interest and the highest security interest that they have right now. So, until we deal with those issues, and the core of that being North Korea and all sides on board with dealing that issue and trying to find constructive solutions to that, we're going to continue to have this problem.
Eugene, there are ongoing discussions between the Americans and the South Koreans on the deployment of THAAD. That general that I mentioned who visited China, General Mark Milley, is now in South Korea. Do you know what is being discussed there?
Oh, that's right. He's on a 3-day visit coming from China. It's part of his Asia tour, and Korea is his second leg. So before he flies out to Japan on Friday, he will be meeting with his South Korean counterpart. And also on Thursday, the 4-star general had a meeting with the U.S. Forces Korea commander, Vincent Brooks, where they discussed follow-up measures of the planned THAAD deployment. He also visited the 35th Air Defense Artillery Brigade, which will be in charge of the THAAD system once deployed in South Korea. Now, what's interesting is, though, it's not just his visit alone, but his visit is actually part of a string of visits made by high-ranking U.S. Army officials since July, since the news of this THAAD deployment was announced as an alliance decision. At the end of July and early August, U.S. Army Secretary Eric Fanning and also U.S. Army Pacific Commander General Robert Brown separately visited the same Army unit set to operate the THAAD system. And just last week, U.S. Missile Defense Chief James Syring, he was in the country to discuss THAAD as well. He met with journalists and stressed that THAAD has a 100% success rate of shooting down enemy missiles, and the system poses no health or environmental risks. So with the U.S. sending its high-ranking military personnel to South Korea, it suggests that the U.S. is working on deploying the THAAD, really regardless of the voices of opposition being heard here in South Korea.
Dmitry, there was a recent meeting, a security meeting between China and Russia, and Beijing and Moscow issued a statement afterwards, and part of that statement said that they would, quote, consider strengthening bilateral coordinating measures, unquote. What does that mean? Are they talking about some kind of joint defense strategy here?
Yes, because unfortunately we have to face it. The United States, if they deploy anti-missiles in South Korea, this will be a threat both to the Chinese and to the Russian anti-nuclear capacity. So we have to take measures. As for the need to oppose North Korea, the United States is to blame for the development of the nuclear and missile program in North Korea. Look, Saddam Hussein did not have weapons of mass destruction, and that was precisely the reason why the United States attacked him without fearing a return strike. Mr. Gaddafi dismantled his nuclear weapons and his chemical weapons, and what was the result? He was murdered by the American allies. So there is no surprise that Russia and China are concerned and that they will do everything to prevent the United States from getting one-sided superiority on the Korean Peninsula.
Okay, and thanks for your contribution, Dmitry. That's where Dmitry Babich says goodbye to us. Thank you. Let's go to Tian Wei in Beijing. And Tian Wei, South Korea says the THAAD system is a necessary defense to counter the threat posed by the DPRK's nuclear weapons. Now, China, we know, has been working for a nuclear-free zone in the Korean Peninsula. Is there anything that China can do to reassure South Korea, prevent the deployment of THAAD?
The interesting thing about this debate is that others have been trying to portray it as a technical issue about how to protect the stability and peace on the Korean Peninsula and also in Northeast Asia. But from China's perspective, and also seems from the Russian perspective, having heard from the Russian counterpart earlier, it is very much a strategic issue. So if it is a strategic issue, we really need to think about what would that mean. We are talking about one THAAD system, which is anti-ballistic missile system, likely to destroy the kind of unities that the six-party talks once managed to give the rest of the world, and certainly to DPRK, about a prospect of resolving the problems on the Korean Peninsula. And also, it dismantled the diplomatic mixtures and entanglement that we have witnessed over the past few years between China and South Korea. That is too much a price to be paid. In a way, it is almost diminished further chances of diplomatic solutions to the biggest problem that we are facing in Northeast Asia. I think that would be a huge pity for all parties. Having said that, though, earlier you also raised the issue of arms race. Yes, we did notice that at this moment, DPRK's nuclear development could be a threat for the rest of the region. And yet, with further build-up, for example, with the THAAD system, which China and Russia believes could be a threat to the strategic balance, it is very much likely every party in the region going to further develop their systems in order to counterbalance one another. This is going to be a detrimental situation we're likely to witness. Very few times that we've witnessed that over the past few decades. We hope this is not going to be such a dangerous beginning.
Right, and Tian Wei, there's one other complication to the whole picture that we're looking at, and that's, according to the Japanese broadcaster NHK, Japan is also looking at acquiring a system like THAAD. How will Beijing respond to Japan getting a system like that?
Certainly, there is a lot of concern from this part of the world. I've been talking to a lot of diplomats from China and also think tank professionals. They express their huge concern, and they consider it is not going to be just South Korea or Japan. There's likely to be more possibilities in the other Asian countries once the United States get the first two to work with them on the THAAD system. So people are wondering what kind of a big-scale program the U.S. is having in mind. Having said that, though, I did notice our South Korean counterpart, who has been giving quite a fair analysis of the situation facing South Korea. But at the same time, it seems that China understands the South Korea is in a dilemma that it needs to protect its own security, but at the same time balance itself between two big powers, China and the United States. But certainly at this moment, taking sides and adopting the THAAD system is not supposed to be the way out. It's only likely to escalate the tensions among big players, and it's not necessarily to be a good solution for South Korea's security either.
Jenny, there was a point that Dmitry Babich made about the DPRK's possession of nuclear weapons, which it sees as some kind of defensive asset. And he cited the examples of Iraq and of Libya. Both countries were bombed by the United States, and they had no means of retaliating. Does he have a point there?
I do believe he has a point. And you know, the question again is how do we address that, since that is kind of the source of the instability and the source of the rising, you know, arms race and rising militarism in the region. And you know, like I said, our policies haven't necessarily been very effective in recent years in really addressing their security concerns either, in order to get them to stop developing and expanding. And in that respect, I think also, you know, China hasn't had the relationship with Kim Jong-un that they have with Kim Jong-il either. So there isn't really the voices of moderation in this process since Kim Jong-un has come to power. And so it makes it very difficult to really deal with that core strategic issue and core to the region in order to sort of prevent some of this other expansion from happening.
Okay, Tian Wei, go ahead.
It's not necessarily that we are looking at other countries, but rather really the threat for the region is real. And the parties have been working together over the past decade in order to solve the problem. We do not want to see the THAAD system to be the determinator to all of the previous progresses and hard work. Remember President Park, when she came into the office, she was also having several plans on hand as to how to approach with the peace and stability on the Korean Peninsula. And also remember over the past few years, there has been debate in South Korea as well about which approach to be taken. As far as I understand, there are several options, even when it comes to military preparedness. And it has been quite a sudden gesture coming from the Park administration to take that system. Obviously, in Seoul, you see the demonstrations, the very strong reactions coming from the locals there because they have not been thoroughly consulted when it comes to this decision. You also see opposition parties inside South Korea voicing different opinions, even though President Park is still enjoying quite high supporting rate at this moment. But certainly these should be political concerns for his administration to move forward. Having said that, though, if the South Korean politics would not be stable, it certainly would not be a good news for the rest of Northeast Asia either. So it seems that from South Korea's own perspective, as far as we can see from here, and also China's own security and the strategic balance, as well as the strategic opportunities that countries should have to work further on peaceful resolution to the Korean Peninsula, that system is not a good solution.
Okay, and that's where we have to leave it. Thanks to all of you for joining us.